Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another video. So it's that time again. We have a new set release coming out in the next few days, Outlaws of Thunder Junction. I think I've been saying at quite a lot, but I think it's of. And we are going to look through my pick for the top 10 Pioneer and Explorer cards. Obviously, these are only my own personal choices. I've taken a look at what a few other people are saying about what they think might be good, look through the cards myself. I'm inevitably wrong about a lot of these, so take all of what I say with an enormous mountain of salt, but it's a good fun thing to do anyway. So the first thing to say about this set is that in terms of like legality and all the different cards in it, it's a complete mess. I mean, like there's the main set, there's the big score cards, there's the special guests, there's the breaking news, and then there's the other ones that were supposed to be the aftermath set. So it's all a bit kind of just all over the place. But you can guarantee that all of the cards I'm going to talk about here are indeed legal in Pioneer and Explorer. So what I'm going to start with a few cards from the breaking news, which is kind of the kind of bonus sheet section of the set, and the special guests, which are coming to Explorer for the first time, but are already legal in Pioneer. There are a few of those, so I've just picked out three to talk about, which I think may see play in Explorer. So they are Skullcrack, which is 1 and a red for an instant that says players can't gain life this turn, damage can't be prevented this turn, and deals 3 damage to target player or planeswalker. So this is a good burn spell. It's a good way of kind of counteracting if the opponent's trying to gain life and stopping you from burning them out of the game. You respond with a skull crack, you do them 3 damage, and they can't gain their life. So this will probably see some play in some burn decks. Then we've got Abrupt Decay, which is a black-green for an instant that says this spell can't be countered. Destroy target non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less. So it's a very efficient removal spell. It gets around ward and things like that. So this will probably replace any kind of Assassin's trophies that might still be being played in Explorer, because most of the time it's just a strictly better card. And as I say, that can't be countered clause is pretty good. And then the other one is Notion Thief, which is a bit of an out there one, but it's a 2 blue-black for a 3/1 with flash. It says if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So it's got that kind of Narset lock effect where the opponent can't draw more than one card. And it's a good way, it does combo with Narset and those kind of Days Undoings and commit to memory style effects, and kind of, you draw 7, the opponent only draws 1, or in this case, they just don't draw any at all. Those are all now legal in Explorer, or will be when the set drops. So you'll probably see those turn up from time to time. So moving on to the main set and the cards which will be coming to Standard for the first time, and therefore to Explorer and Pioneer. So as usual, starting with our honourable mentions, we have Aven Interrupter, so 1 and 2 white for a 2/2 with flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile target spell, it becomes plotted, and spells your opponent's cast from graveyards or from exile cost 2 more to cast. So this is a kind of spell queller style effect. It's probably not as good on the surface as spell queller, but it is only 1 colour, which does allow it to be played in a greater variety of decks. Depending on what you exile, I mean, this completely hoses counter spells, because remember that plotted cards can only be cast at sorcery speed. So there are certain interactions that will mean their card just becomes useless. But even if this just sticks around, stopping the opponent casting things from their graveyard or from exile, it makes all of their creatures on an adventure cost more. There's some utility there, I think. So that's an interesting new card that has that kind of spell queller effect. Then we have 3 Steps Ahead, which is our first Spree card. So Spree is a kind of multi-kicker. In that it has an initial mana cost, and then you can pay 1 or more additional mana costs. So you do have to do 1. You can't just cast it for its kind of base mana cost. But this one is 1 blue mana, and you can spree. So 1 and a blue, counter target spell. 3 generic, create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, and 2, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. So, kind of 3 mana counter spells are not particularly good rate anymore, but this is so versatile and has so many different modes that I think there's potential here for it to see play in control decks and things like that. If the counter spell is not doing much good for you, then you can just use it as a draw spell. Yeah, it's not the best draw spell because you have to discard, but it's better than nothing. And later in the game, you can perhaps copy one of your finishers or a good artifact. There's just lots that you can do here. So I think these are going to be good cards. And there's the additional interaction that its mana value is only 1, despite all of its kind of other abilities. So you can, things that care about cheap instants and sorceries, recurring them from the graveyard, whatever it may be, fetching them from the library, then this only has a mana value of 1, so that is worth paying attention. So my next honourable mention is Stoic Sphinx. So this is a 3/5 for 4, flash flying, and it has hexproof as long as you haven't cast a spell this turn. So I'm quite high on this card, and I may well be wrong about this, but it feels like a great control finisher. I mean, it's not expensive. It can come down and be protected by counter magic in the late game. Has a very high power, and it's quite hard to interact with, especially if you're a deck that's doing lots of things at instant speed. This will have hexproof most of the time, potentially only kind of a very brief window for the opponent to interact with it on their end step. And so, yeah, this could potentially see you play in some control decks as just a very good way of kind of closing out the game quite quickly. So that is Stoic Sphinx. Then we have Rush of Dread, which is another spree card. So 1 and 2 black mana for a sorcery. And then its spree effects are +1 generic mana. Target opponent sacrifices half the creatures they control, rounded up. +2, they discard half the cards in their hand, rounded up. And +2, they lose half their life, rounded up. So this is an interesting one. It's mainly on here because it is a kind of Splinter Twin style win the game immediately, as long as the opponent has an even life total, I should say, with Bloodletter of Aclazots, which doubles all life loss that the opponent suffers. So, a kind of 4 into 5, you could potentially win the game very, very quickly. Now, it'd be interesting to see whether that combo has any kind of resilience, how kind of much of a glass cannon it is, but it is there, so I think that is worth paying attention to. Colossal Rattleworm is 6/5 for 4 mana in green. It has flash as long as you control a desert. It has trample and you can pay 1 and a green. Exile it from your graveyard to search your library for a desert card. Put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So this is just like, it's so aggressively costed. Even if you don't have a desert, 6/5 trample for 4 is pretty spicy. And if you do, which you may well kind of choose to put one in the deck, given how this kind of builds, then this coming in at instant speed, potentially killing an opponent's creature because you flashed it in, then attacking for 6. Yeah, there's some pretty spicy stuff going on there, and then you can use it as a ramp card later on, or if it ends up in the graveyard for any other reason, then it's got other abilities as well. And then our final honourable mention is Pillage the Bog. So this is black and a green for a sorcery that says look at the top X cards of your library, where X is twice the number of lands you control, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and then you can plot it for 3. So at worst, this is kind of a sorcery speed impulse, that kind of look at top 4, pick 1. So that's not terrible. But then potentially later in the game, this can look at a lot of cards. And then if you do have the time to plot it, then you can potentially cast it later to just kind of fetch one of the top 8 to 10 cards and then have all of your mana available to cast it. So there may be something there in terms of just helping you kind of find the very card that you need for not a huge amount of mana, so worth paying attention to. So those are our honourable mentions. So moving on to our actual top 10 now. So coming in at number 10, we have High Noon, which is a classic film reference, but 1 and a white for an enchantment that says each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, and you can pay 5 and sacrifice it to deal 5 damage to any target. So this is an Archon of Emeria style effect, essentially saying that each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. That's what Archon of Emeria does. Obviously, this is slightly less vulnerable to removal. It is, it also can't damage the opponent in the same way over multiple turns, so there is that to consider, and it is cheaper. So it's aggressively costed. It hoses multiple decks in the format. You're not running any combo deck. You're not really doing any Is It Phoenix stuff if this is on the battlefield. And unlike a lot of the other cards like this, it's not useless in multiples either, because as long as you can pay the red to sacrifice it, then dealing 5 damage to any target is actually pretty juicy. And there's so much kind of incidental treasure and that kind of thing in the format now that you don't even necessarily need to be playing white-red to take advantage of that. So that's worth paying attention to. And it does compete with Deafening Silence. Deafening Silence is only 1 mana, but it does also shut down. This does also shut down creature spells as well, so it does have that advantage. So I think this will see some sideboard play in multiple decks. I think it's probably the best of this kind of effect that exists. It has that additional ability as well. So High Noon, yeah, good sideboard card at number 10. Number 9, we have Highway Robbery. Speaking of Visit Phoenix, I think this could potentially slot quite nicely into that deck. So this is a pretty powerful common. It's 1 and a red for a sorcery. It says you may discard a card or sacrifice a land. If you do, draw 2 cards. And you can plot it for 1 and a red. So essentially put it into exile and then cast it later on a later turn without paying its mana cost as a sorcery. So that kind of ability is actually pretty neat in Is It Phoenix. You can set up kind of almost guaranteed Phoenix turns where you cast 3 instants of sorceries with this, especially if you're casting it for free. Discarding a Phoenix and then should be relatively easy to kind of play 2 1-drops after that. So this lets you set up, I think, a much more consistent turn 3 Phoenix, being essentially a free spell, and it also helps counteract mana flood later in the game. You can just sacrifice a land to draw 2 cards, so sometimes that will be pretty good. So I suspect this may well see play in those kind of style of decks. Then at number 8, we have one of our cards from what was going to be the Aftermath set. So we have Pest Control. So this is white-black for a sorcery that says destroy all non-land permanents with mana value 1 or less. And it has cycling 2, so you can pay 2, discard it, and draw a card. So again, this completely wrecks certain strategies in the format. Hello, Boros Convoke. I'm going to destroy your Thraben Inspectors, your Novice Inspectors, all of your Goblin tokens, all of your Clue tokens. And I'm going to do it for 2 mana. Cycling also means that this is never really a dead card. You can just trade it in for something else for a relatively cheap cost if it's not doing anything for you. I think that's specifically in there for kind of best of 1, so that this isn't entirely just a sideboard card. In best of 3, you probably will just run it in the sideboard, but it's pretty good. I think the only potential drawback to this is it's not in a particularly popular colour combination compared to the other alternatives. If you consider Hidejitsu Consumes All, yes, that's 1 more mana. It has the other effects which are kind of marginal, but it's in black-red, which is a much more popular colour combination. So we'll see how much this being 2 mana makes a difference, despite its sort of somewhat restrictive colour drawback. Number 7, we have Slick Sequence. So again, potentially something for Is It Phoenix. There's a lot of cards in this set which may be good in that deck. So this is blue-red for an instant. It deals 2 damage to any target, and if you've cast another spell this turn, draw a card. So this is pretty high variance of outcomes. At worst, it's just an incredibly bad shock. But it has potential in decks which are chaining lots of spells together, and at its best, it's basically a cheaper version of Electrolyze, which is a card which used to see Modern play. So this could pretty easily cantrip into more spells, particularly in decks which are running a lot of those cheap 1 mana spells. And unlike most of the other damage spells, it can also draw your card. Fiery Impulse, Lightning Axe, they're all good. They all serve different functions in the deck, but they don't draw a card. And this potentially could. So I think there is some power there to see how much it being 2 mana can kind of stop it from seeing that much play. And then we have number 6, we have Smuggler's Surprise. This is another one of our spree cards. So it's a 1 green for an instant. With spree, pay 2 generic mana to mill 4 cards. You may put up to 2 creature and or land cards from among the mill cards into your hand. Pay another 4 and a green, and you can put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. And +1 creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So again, very versatile. There's lots of different modes which could potentially be quite useful here. I think primarily we're looking at the middle one, that ability to pay 6 at instant speed and just dump 2 creature cards from our hand onto the battlefield, Ulamogs, Emrakuls, whatever it may be. And as I mentioned earlier, the spree cards all have those kind of interesting interactions because of their mana cost. This is a 1 mana spell, so it does benefit from those kind of effects which care about the mana value. Putting 2 creatures straight onto the battlefield for 6 mana is powerful, and the additional modes are pretty useful mana sinks later in the game. You do have to kind of balance that against the fact that you may just have no cards by the time you're getting ready to cast this. But if you have lots and lots of mana because you're running a mono green deck, which often do, 2 do have that kind of huge amounts of mana, then you can also use the mill effect, or just as a cheap kind of way of protecting your big creatures against opponents' removal. So yeah, there's lots of abilities here, all of which can be pretty good in the right situations. Number 5, we have Scorching Shot. So you may notice there's quite a lot of red on this particular list. I think this is a pretty good set for red cards. So this is 2 red mana for a sorcery, 5 damage to target creature, very clean. It's pretty much a strict upgrade to Roast, which is a Pioneer but not Explorer card at the moment, which is 1 and a red to deal 5 damage to a non-flying creature. So this doesn't have the non-flying restriction, but its mana cost is a little bit more restrictive. But realistically, I don't actually think the mana cost is that restrictive, because if you think about the things you're potentially targeting with this, as I say, it's a pretty clean answer to Shieldred, and a cleanish, as much as anything, is a cleanish answer to Vein Ripper. It does at least do lethal damage to it. These cards aren't going to hit the board until turn 3 or 4, so you'll probably have the double red, even if you aren't running a specifically mono red strategy. So again, this looks like a sideboard card, but I think a potential sideboard all-star. And mono red may well even run 1 or 2 in the main deck, just because it is so efficient at removing some of the best creatures in the format. At number 4, we have Jace Reawakened. So this is an interesting new Planeswalker. Only the third 2-mana Planeswalker ever printed. You had Terrible Tybalt way back when, and then Renin 6 in Modern Horizons. So this is a 3 loyalty Planeswalker for 2 blue mana. You can't cast the spell during your first, second, or third turns of the game. It has 2+1s, one of which is draw a card and discard a card, and you may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted, and -6 until end of turn whenever you cast a spell. Copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, I mean, it is worth saying that the restriction only applies to your first 3 turns. So if you can find a way to flash this in with a Leyline of Anticipation or something like that, then that could be pretty neat. I'm not saying you should build your deck in that way. It's probably not worth playing Leyline of Anticipation purely to do that. I think this card is good enough being played on turn 4, because with the cheap mana value, you can just play it and protect it with counter magic straight away in that kind of Teferi style way where you're not paying the full cost of what the card is. And the plottability will have some pretty broken interactions. I think if you plot a Valky, you can then just cast the Tybalt side of it. So there are some pretty neat and probably quite broken ways to use this card. It may well not come to anything. They have, I think, consciously powered down Planeswalkers in recent times, so this may be another example of that. But 2 mana Planeswalker worth paying attention to, and it's obviously better than Tybalt, so we'll take that. Number 3 is another Spree card. Spree card's very, very good on this list. A mythic one this time for Final Showdown. So this is a 1 white mana, and then its Spree abilities are 1 generic. All creatures lose all abilities until end of turn. 1 generic, choose a creature you control. It gains indestructible until end of turn. And then 3 and 2 white, destroy all creatures. So this, at its kind of most common usage, I think will be a 6 mana instant speed Wrath, which I think is the cheapest instant speed Wrath ever printed. On the face of it, it's not as powerful as Farewell in terms of its effect, but 6 mana in white at instant speed is now incredibly dangerous for your opponents. So you can just wrath the board at the end of their turn, and then if you have 7 mana or 8 mana, you can not only get around their indestructible or anything like that, you can also protect a creature you control and then attack with it. So if you are going long in those kind of control style decks trying to take over the game, then this can potentially protect your finisher, your Dream Trawler or your Angel or whatever it may be, and just wrath the board of all the other creatures. So yeah, that is pretty spicy. This feels very aggressively costed and kind of pushed in a number of interesting ways. Clearly, it's also meant to be a commander card. Everything's commander now, but I think this will have some applications as well. And again, with all of these other Spree cards, its mana value is only 1, so it is recurable and fetchable with anything that cares about 1 mana spells. So that is definitely worth considering, and I suspect we'll see play. Number 2, we have another one of our not Aftermath cards. So this is Legion Extruder, a 1 and a red for another red card, for an artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to a target. Pay 2, tap, sacrifice an artifact, and create a 3/3 colourless golem artifact creature token. Notably, it does not say you have to do this at sorcery speed, which if you were asking me to guess what this card, whether it said that, I would probably say yes. That seems to be a thing that they do quite often now, but not on this. So again, yes, March of the powerful red cards in this set. So it has that kind of Bone Crusher, Giant style ETB, that 2 damage for 2 mana, that basically means it's always playable. And then there are so many incidental artifacts in this format, treasures, blood, maps, that you can now just turn into 3/3 threats. I mean, this is absolutely terrifying in multiples. And yeah, you're just turning all of these potentially useless artifacts now into 3/3s. The Insoul artifact is a deck. This could potentially see play there. Yeah, this is very good. I would be surprised if this didn't see a lot of play at one point or another. And so our number one, this is an interesting one actually, in that this set, unlike a couple of the last ones, like Murders at Karlov Manor with cards like No More Lies or Lost Caverns of Ixalan with Cavern of Souls, it doesn't immediately jump out at me what the best card for Pioneer and Explorer in the set is. I mean, in Karlov Manor is obviously No More Lies, even though I didn't put it at number one, but we don't talk about that. So yeah, I think this has been a little more difficult, but my number one is another red card. And it's Slick Shot Show Off. So 1 and a red for a 1/2 with flying and haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and you can plot it for 1 and a red. So I think this slots very neatly into prowess or heroic strategies. It's the right colour for both. They're either Izzet or Boros, so they're both playing red. And this just, this will kill an opponent in like one turn if or do like 10 or 12 damage, particularly if it's plotted. You put it into play, you put a monstrous rage on it, and suddenly you're attacking for 6 already. It's got evasion, so it's very hard for the opponent to deal with. And you've only actually spent 1 mana on the turn that you're doing this. So yeah, I think this is very good, and I think a lot of people think it's very good as well. I think it slots, as I say, I think it goes neatly into strategies which already exist in the format, which I think is makes it kind of a surer bet that it will see play. It doesn't have to kind of create new archetypes of its own. One of the most powerful of these kind of effects, those kind of those Kiln Fiend style effects where it just gets bigger and bigger and snowballs out of control. It has flying, it has haste. You can plot it to kind of set up very powerful turns. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of this card. I think it will see a lot of play. So that is our top 10 cards from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Interested to see what you think in the comments. I'm sure there are cards which I've missed, which will probably be quite good. So let me know what you're excited to be playing in the format, anything you agree with, anything you disagree with. Always willing to kind of get into a discussion like that. It's always the excitement of new cards. And yeah, we will see what these can do when the set drops in a few days. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Hit those like and subscribe buttons as ever. There will be lots of interesting content to come with these new cards. And yeah, I'll see you next time.